The Barzan scum didn't know it, but by killing Richard Rice's dog, they'd just signed their own death warrants. Commander Jack Harrison looked out at the fresh-faced recruits, all rookies eager to hear tales of humanity's greatest heroes, heroes like Richard Rice. Harrison cleared his throat, voice gravelly, from barking orders over plasma fire for 3 decades. Y'all are here because you want to be like Rice. Well, listen up. It was 22-157. Barzan reptiles decided Earth was their next target. 7 billion humans, caught with our pants down. Their commander was Rigor, a mean son of a bitch. Rice was attached to Sigma Force back then, guarding a base in the Rockies. Gene mods made Rice a super, but he wasn't invincible. Harrison paused, surveying the room. The recruits hung on his every word. The Barzans found Rice's soft spot. They killed his dog, Max. That pup was the only thing Rice had left from his old life, before the mods, before all this. Harrison slammed a fist on the podium. The recruits jumped. You don't kill a man's dog. Rice was going to show these alien bastards that you don't fuck with humanity, you don't fuck with Sigma Force, and you sure as hell don't fuck with Richard Rice's dog. Harrison slammed his hand on the podium. Rice snuck into that Barzan base like a ghost. He had an experimental plasma rifle, a monomolecular blade, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Jupiter. Those reptilian bastards didn't stand a chance. The old commander's eyes scanned the room, locking with each recruit. Rice's gene mods made him faster, stronger, and smarter than any human before him. He sliced through the perimeter guards like they were made of paper. A dozen heavily armed Barzan soldiers, dead before they even knew what hit him. Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. As Rice made his way to the command center, he overheard a conversation that changed everything. Rigor, that slimy Barzan commander, was talking to his right-hand man, a strategist named Zax. They had some kind of alien artifact, a quantum disruptor, that could disable Earth's entire defense system. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. The stakes had never been higher. Rice knew he had to act fast, Harrison continued, his voice rising with each word. If the Barzans deployed that artifact, Earth was as good as conquered. So he came up with a plan so crazy, so daring, that only a man like Richard Rice could pull it off. The commander paused, letting the tension build. The recruits leaned forward in their seats, hanging on his every word. Rice was going to infiltrate that command center and take on Riga himself, one man against the most ruthless Barzan commander in the galaxy. The odds were stacked against him, but when it comes to Richard Rice, you never bet against humanity. Harrison's eyes gleamed with pride as he recounted Rice's next move. Rice knew he had to get to that quantum disruptor before the Barzans could use it, but the vault was deep in the base, heavily guarded. He needed a distraction. The commander leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So he stole a Barzan uniform and used some fancy holographic tech to disguise himself, walked right into that command center like he owned the place. The recruits murmured, impressed by Rice's audacity. But once he was inside, he realized the vault was even more secure than he thought. Guards everywhere, state-of-the-art security systems. Rice had to think fast. Harrison paused, letting the tension build. He snuck into the power generator room and planted explosives, set him off, and boom! He slammed his fist on the podium, making the recruits jump. The whole base shook like it was hit by an earthquake. The commander's voice rose with excitement. In the chaos, Rice made his move. He fought his way through dozens of Barzan soldiers, using every trick in the book: plasma rifle, monomolecular blade, hand-to-hand combat. He was a one-man army. Harrison's hands moved animatedly as he described the action. Rice was a blur of motion, dodging plasma bolts and slicing through armor like it was butter. The Barzans never stood a chance. As he reached the climax of the story, Harrison's voice grew more intense. But just as Rice was about to reach the vault, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Zax, Rigor's right-hand man, and he was no ordinary Barzan. The recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word. Zax had cybernetic enhancements, making him faster and stronger than any Barzan Rice had faced before, and he was a master of their martial arts. Harrison's eyes narrowed. The two clashed in a fierce battle, trading blows that would have killed a normal man. But Rice had his gene mods and his unbreakable will. He pushed himself to the limit, using every ounce of speed and strength he had. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. In the end, it was Rice's agility that saved him. He outmaneuvered Zax, landing a decisive blow that sent the Barzan crashing to the ground, sparks flying from his damaged cybernetics. The recruits sat in stunned silence, marveling at Rice's incredible feat. But Harrison wasn't done yet. With Zax defeated, Rice stood before the vault, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew Rigor was waiting for him, and that the fate of Earth hung in the balance. The commander looked out at the sea of faces, each one filled with a mix of awe and anticipation. They all knew that the story was far from over, and that Richard Rice's greatest test was yet to come. Harrison's voice dropped to a hushed whisper as he described Rice's final obstacle. Rice blasted through that vault door like it was made of paper. The quantum disruptor was right there, glowing an eerie blue. He grabbed it, ready to make his escape, but that's when Rigor showed up. The recruits held their breath, leaning forward in their seats. Rigor was decked out in this advanced alien armor, holding a plasma hammer that crackled with energy. He was pissed as hell, ready to crush Rice like a bug. Harrison slammed his fist on the podium, but Rice wasn't about to back down, not with the fate of Earth on the line. They clashed right there in the command center, plasma hammer against monomolecular blade, sparks flying everywhere. The commander's hands moved animatedly, painting a picture of the brutal battle. Rigor was strong and that armor made him tough as nails. Rice's gene mods were pushed to their limits as he dodged and weaved, trying to find a weak spot. The recruits were on the edge of their seats, hanging on every word. The command center was getting wrecked, consoles smashed, walls crumbling. But Rice, he kept fighting even as Rigor hammered away at his defenses. Harrison's voice grew strained, as if he were reliving the battle himself. Rice was on the ropes, his armor cracked, his blade chipped. Rigor had him backed into a corner, ready to deliver the killing blow. The room was silent, the tension palpable. But Rice, he had one last trick up his sleeve. He'd memorized the layout of the base, knew its weak points. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed a plasma grenade at the ceiling above Rigor. Harrison's voice rose to a crescendo. The explosion was deafening, a chunk of the ceiling crashing down on Rigor, burying him under a ton of rubble. The recruits let out a collective gasp, eyes wide with shock. Rice didn't stick around to see if Rigor was dead. He had the quantum disruptor, and he needed to get it the hell out of there. So he ran faster than he'd ever run before as the base crumbled around him. Harrison paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Rice still had to get the artifact to safety, and the Barzans, they'd be coming for him, coming for all of us. The recruits sat in stunned silence, the weight of Rice's mission sinking in. They knew that the fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of one man, a man who had just done the impossible. Commander Harrison's grizzled voice dropped to a whisper as he continued the tale of Richard Rice's daring escape from the Barzan command center. Rice ran through the crumbling base, the quantum disruptor clutched tight. Alarms blared, emergency lights flashing red. He burst out into the war-torn landscape, a hellscape of scorched earth and smoldering ruins. The recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word. But Rice's mission was far from over. He had to navigate through Barzan-occupied territory to reach the extraction point, and those reptilian bastards were hot on his heels. Harrison's hands moved animatedly as he described the action. Rice moved like a ghost, using the terrain to his advantage, but the Barzans were relentless. He'd take out one squad, and another would be right behind them. The commander's voice grew strained, as if he were reliving the battle himself. Rice's plasma rifle ran hot as he cut down Barzan after Barzan. His monomolecular blade flashed in the dim light, slicing through armor and bone. It was a running battle, a test of endurance and skill. The recruits were on the edge of their seats, marveling at Rice's prowess. But in the midst of all that chaos, Rice found something unexpected. A group of human survivors, civilians who'd been hiding from the Barazans. They were scared, hungry, and desperate. Harrison's voice softened, a hint of emotion creeping in. Among them was a young boy named Alex. Kid couldn't have been more than 10. He'd lost his whole family to the invasion. The recruits exchanged glances, suddenly reminded of the human cost of the war. Rice, he saw something in that boy, a reflection of himself maybe, of the childhood he'd lost when he became a super soldier. Harrison paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. So Rice made a decision. He was going to get those survivors to safety, no matter the cost. He gathered them up and set off, the quantum disruptor in one hand, his rifle in the other. The commander's voice grew heavy with emotion. It wasn't easy. Rice had to fight every step of the way, protecting the civilians while battling the Barzans, but he never wavered, never faltered. The recruits sat in stunned silence, seeing their hero in a new light. And through it all, Rice formed a bond with young Alex, taught him how to be brave in the face of fear, how to keep going even when all seemed lost. Harrison's gaze swept over the room, making eye contact with each recruit. It was a side of Rice I'd never seen before. The war, it had taken a toll on him. But that connection with Alex, it brought out his humanity. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. Even the strongest among us can be affected by the horrors of war. Rice, he was no exception, but he never let it stop him from doing what was right. The recruits nodded solemnly, a newfound respect for their hero growing in their hearts. And so Rice fought on, the survivors in tow, the quantum disruptor his beacon of hope. He was a man on a mission, a soldier with a purpose, and nothing, not the Barzans, not the toll of war, would stand in his way. The recruits sat spellbound as Harrison delved deeper into the incredible tale of Richard Rice and his daring mission. Rice and the survivors were so close to the extraction point they could taste it, Harrison growled, his voice raw with emotion. But that's when all hell broke loose. The old commander slammed his fist on the podium, making the recruits jump. Rigor and his goons came out of nowhere, plasma rifles blazing. That slimy bastard had survived the command center collapse and was out for blood. Harrison's eyes narrowed as he recounted the ambush. Rice shoved Alex and the other civilians behind cover, then let loose with his own rifle. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as he and Rigor traded shots. The recruits could almost smell the ozone and hear the sizzle of plasma against metal as Harrison described the fierce firefight. But Rigor had numbers on his side. His soldiers swarmed Rice's position, threatening to overwhelm him. It looked like our boy was done for. Harrison paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. The recruits held their breath, hardly daring to breathe. That's when young Alex did something incredible. The kid stood up, eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. He thrust out his hands, and the Barzan soldiers just froze. The commander's voice dropped to an awed whisper. Turns out Alex was a latent psychic, a rare gift even among gene-modded humans. With a thought, he sent a wave of crippling pain and confusion washing over the Barzans. The recruits murmured in astonishment, leaning forward to catch every word. Rice didn't hesitate. He leapt from cover, plasma rifle spitting death. Alex's psychic attack had the Barzans reeling, and Rice took full advantage. Harrison's hands moved animatedly, painting a picture of the incredible battle. They fought like a well-oiled machine, Rice and Alex. The kid kept the Barzans off balance with his mind blasts, while Rice cut them down with ruthless efficiency. The commander's voice rose to a crescendo. Rigor, caught off guard by Alex's powers, could barely put up a fight. Rice hit him with a barrage of plasma bolts, searing him to the bone. The recruits gasped, eyes wide with shock and awe. In the end, Rigor's soldiers lay strewn about the battlefield, their armor smoking and blood soaking into the dirt. Rigor himself crawled away, badly wounded, but alive. Harrison let out a heavy sigh, as if the weight of the tale rested on his shoulders. Rice knew he couldn't finish Rigor off, not with the survivors to protect. So he gathered them up and made a break for the extraction point. The commander fixed the recruits with a piercing stare. It was a hell of a thing what Rice and Alex did that day. They faced impossible odds and came out on top, all to protect the innocent and complete the mission. The room was silent, the recruits processing the incredible story they'd just heard. They knew they were in the presence of true heroes, men who embodied the indomitable spirit of humanity. Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes distant. But the battle was far from over. Rice still had to get the quantum disruptor and the survivors to safety, and the Barzans were hot on their heels. Harrison's voice dropped to a hushed whisper as he described the final confrontation between Rice and Rigor. The survivors and Alex made a desperate dash for the extraction ship as it touched down, kicking up clouds of dust. Rice stood his ground, plasma rifle leveled at the shimmering form of Rigor decloaking before him. "It ends here, Riga," Rice growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're not getting that artifact." Rigor laughed, a harsh grating sound that set Rice's teeth on edge. "Foolish human," the Barzan commander spat, drawing a sleek alien weapon from his hip. "You think you can best me? I, who have conquered a dozen worlds." Rice didn't bother with a reply. He opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. But Rigor was fast, his form flickering as he activated his phasing technology. The plasma passed harmlessly through him, dissipating into the atmosphere. "My turn," Rigor snarled, leveling his own weapon. A beam of scintillating energy lanced out, passing through Rice's armor like it wasn't even there. Rice screamed as pain lanced through his body, his flesh seared by the phasing beam. He dropped to one knee, his vision swimming. Rigor advanced, his weapon pulsing with baleful light. "Did you really think a primitive ape like you could defeat the might of the Barzan Empire?" He kicked Rice's plasma rifle away, savoring his moment of triumph. But Rice wasn't done. Even as pain racked his body, his mind raced, analyzing Rigor's weapon. There had to be a weakness, a flaw he could exploit. And then he saw it. A faint fluctuation in the beam, a split second where it became corporeal. Rice lunged, ignoring the agony that screamed through his nerves. His monomolecular blade flashed, a silver arc slicing through the air. Rigor, caught off guard, tried to phase out, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. The blade caught him in the chest, piercing his armor, his flesh, his heart. Rigor's eyes widened in shock, his weapon clattering to the ground. He staggered back, dark blood welling from the wound. "Impossible," he gurgled, dropping to his knees. "Defeated as by a human?" Rice stood over him, his blade poised for the killing blow. But he hesitated, seeing the realization dawn in Rigor's eyes. "You underestimated us," Rice said quietly. "Humanity, our tenacity, our skill, our will to survive." Rigor coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Perhaps I did." His eyes met Rice's, a flicker of respect passing between the two warriors. Then he slumped forward, the life draining from his body. Rice stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. He looked to the extraction ship, seeing Alex and the survivors safe inside. The quantum disruptor was secure. The mission was complete. But the war was far from over. As Rice limped towards the ship, he knew that this was just the beginning. Earth had won a battle, but the Barzan Empire was vast. There would be other commanders, other threats, but there would also be other heroes, men and women like Rice, ready to stand against the darkness. The recruits sat in stunned silence as Harrison finished his tale. They had heard of Rice's exploits, but never in such vivid detail. They knew they were in the presence of a legend, a man who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. But they also knew that Rice's story was not unique. In the face of an implacable enemy, humanity had produced countless heroes, each facing their own trials, their own battles, and with young warriors like Alex emerging, a new generation of psychic defenders, there was hope for the future. Hope that one day the war would end, that humanity would emerge from the crucible of conflict stronger, united, and ready to take their place among the stars. But that day was still to come, and the road ahead was long and hard. Harrison looked out at the sea of faces, seeing the determination, the resolve etched in each one. These recruits, they were the future, the next generation of heroes. And he knew that with soldiers like these, humanity would never stop fighting, never stop pushing back against the darkness. The old commander straightened, his voice ringing out across the room. "Rice's story is just one of many," he said, his eyes blazing with fierce pride. "Each of you has the potential to be a hero, to make a difference in this war. Never forget that. Never forget what we're fighting for." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humanity, fuck yeah," he said softly, a battle cry and a prayer all in one. "Dirty." The recruit sat with bated breath as Harrison delved into the details of Rice's most daring mission yet. The grizzled commander's voice was low and intense, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and solemnity as he recounted the events. Rice and his team, a hand-picked group of the best soldiers humanity had to offer, knew this was our chance to turn the tide of the war, Harrison said, his hands gripping the podium. Using a captured Barzan shuttle and some damn impressive stealth tech, they slipped past the mothership's defenses like ghosts in the night. The recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word as Harrison painted a vivid picture of the infiltration. Once inside, they split up. One team went to take out the main power core, while Rice led the other straight to the command bridge. Their mission: disable those weapon systems and cut the head off the snake. Harrison's voice grew more animated as he described the fierce resistance Rice's team encountered. The Barzans threw everything they had at them, close-quarters combat in those tight corridors, ship-to-ship firefights that lit up the void of space. But Rice, with those gene mods and his tactical genius, he led his squad through hell and back, always one step ahead of the enemy. The commander paused, his expression darkening. But what they found on that ship, it shook them to the core. The Barzans, they'd been playing God, experimenting with human DNA, trying to create their own super soldiers to match the likes of Rice. A murmur of disbelief and horror rippled through the room as Harrison continued, his voice grim. These alien-human hybrids, they were something else. All the strength and resilience of humanity, twisted and augmented by Barzan tech. And Rice's team, they had to face them head-on. The recruits could almost hear the sounds of battle ringing in their ears as Harrison described the brutal confrontation. It was a fight like no other, a testament to how far both sides were willing to go. Rice and his soldiers, pitted against these abominations that wore human faces but bled Barzan blood. Harrison's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white as he relived the intensity of the moment. The mothership became a war zone, a labyrinth of death and destruction as Rice's team fought tooth and nail to complete their mission. Plasma scorched the air, blades clashed against alien alloy, and the screams of the dying echoed through the halls. The room was silent, the tension palpable as the recruits waited to hear how Rice would overcome this terrifying new foe. Harrison's gaze swept over the room, his eyes haunted by the memories of the battle. Rice knew he had to adapt, to think beyond anything he'd faced before. These hybrids, they were fast, strong, and utterly ruthless. But Rice, he had something they didn't. The indomitable human spirit, the refusal to surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper, the recruits straining to hear his every word. And so, in the heart of the Barzan mothership, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Rice and his team prepared to make their final stand. They knew that failure was not an option, that the fate of Earth and all of humanity rested on their shoulders. Harrison paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The recruits sat motionless, their hearts pounding, their minds racing with the possibilities of what would happen next. They knew that Rice was a legend, a hero forged in the fires of war. But against these alien-human hybrids, even he would be pushed to his limits. The commander's voice was barely audible as he spoke the final words of the story segment, leaving the recruits hanging on a precipice of anticipation. And as the battle raged on, as plasma seared the air and blood stained the decks, Rice knew that this fight would define not only his own fate but the fate of the entire human race. Harrison's voice grew strained as he recounted the final harrowing moments of Rice's mission aboard the Barzan mothership. The recruits sat transfixed, their hearts pounding as they pictured the scene unfolding in their minds. Rice and his team fought their way to the command bridge, a trail of Barzan bodies in their wake, Harrison said, his eyes distant as if reliving the memory. But when they got there, they found themselves face to face with the ship's captain and a squad of those damn alien-human hybrids. The recruits could almost hear the sizzle of plasma and the clashing of blades, as Harrison described the desperate battle that ensued. Rice and his soldiers fought with everything they had, but the hybrids were too strong, too fast. One by one, Rice's team fell, Harrison said, his voice heavy with emotion, until it was just him standing alone against impossible odds. The room was silent, the tension palpable, as the recruits waited to hear how Rice would overcome this final challenge. Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But Rice, he didn't falter. Even as the hybrids closed in, he fought with a fury I've never seen before or since. It was like he was possessed, driven by pure rage and determination. The recruits could picture Rice, battered and bloody, his armor torn and his weapons spent, facing down the last of the hybrids with nothing but his fists and his indomitable will. And somehow, against all odds, he did it, Harrison said, a note of awe creeping into his voice. He took down those hybrids one by one until only he and the captain were left standing. The recruits let out a collective breath, hardly daring to believe what they had just heard. But Harrison wasn't finished. What happened next? Well, it changed everything, he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. The captain, he told Rice the truth about the Barzans, about how their world had been destroyed, and how they were just trying to survive. The recruits exchanged glances, suddenly unsure of what to think. The Barzans, their hated enemy, driven to invasion by desperation. It was almost too much to believe. Rice, he could have ended it right there, Harrison continued, his voice growing distant. But he didn't. He saw something in that captain, something that made him hesitate. The room was silent, hanging on Harrison's every word. In that moment, Rice made a choice that would change the course of the war and the fate of both our species. Harrison paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The recruits leaned forward, their hearts pounding, waiting to hear what Rice had done. He lowered his weapon, Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, and he told the captain that he understood, that he would fight for peace, for a way for humans and Barzans to coexist. The recruits sat back, stunned by this revelation. Rice, the legendary warrior, the scourge of the Barzans, advocating for peace. It was almost unthinkable. But Rice knew that there could be no peace while the mothership remained a threat, Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. So he made one final sacrifice. The room was silent, the recruits holding their breath as they waited to hear what Rice had done. He stayed behind, Harrison said, his voice cracking with emotion. He sent his team back to the shuttle and he stayed on that bridge, alone with the captain and the ship's controls. The recruits could almost see it, Rice standing tall amidst the wreckage of the command bridge, his hand poised over the detonator that would end it all. With one last look at the captain, Rice activated the explosives his team had planted throughout the ship, and in a blinding flash of light, the mothership was gone, taking Rice and the captain with it. The room was silent, the recruits struggling to process the magnitude of Rice's sacrifice. Harrison let out a long, slow breath, his eyes distant. In that moment, Richard Rice became more than just a soldier, more than just a hero. He became a symbol, a beacon of hope for all of humanity. The recruits nodded slowly, understanding dawning on their faces. Rice hadn't just fought for Earth, for his fallen comrades. He had fought for something greater, something that transcended the war and the hatred between their species. Rice showed us that even in our darkest hour, there is always a chance for peace, for understanding, Harrison said, his voice growing stronger with each word. And that is his true legacy, the lesson he left behind for all of us. The recruits sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they contemplated the incredible story they had just heard. They knew that they would carry the memory of Richard Rice with them always, a shining example of what it meant to be human in the face of impossible odds. And as they looked to the future, to the challenges that lay ahead, they knew that they would face them with the same courage, the same determination that had driven Rice to make the ultimate sacrifice. For they were the next generation of defenders, the inheritors of Rice's legacy, and they would not let him down. If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.